The Star Wars galaxy is growing bigger than ever, with the stakes getting higher as we approach Ahsoka, which will have significant implications for the Mandoverse. But to gain a deeper understanding, shows like Rebels are essential. Which episodes should you watch? And what is going to happen in Dave Filoni's Star Wars movie? We have the answers. Welcome to Star Wars Uplink, your place for everything Star Wars gaming, the TV shows, and the movies. Let's jump in.
Just you reconsider playing that message for him.
So I think Mandalorian Season 3, among all of its different, revelations, we really got to look at how Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are expecting things to connect throughout the Star Wars universe. We're seeing a lot more of, Rebels and Clone Wars stuff, obviously, Dave Filoni's involved, as well as things from Mandalorian go into stuff like Book of Boba Fett, which we have thoughts on that, but it is a very deep connection when it comes to Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett. So much so that it felt like Mando Season 2.5 in that
Book of Boba Fett.
2 to 3 episode run of Book of Boba Fett.
Yep.
But I think what's really showing is where they want to go and what their expectations are when it comes to this. And I think they're going for, they all but say this. They're looking at, how can we have our Marvel moment within Star Wars? But instead of having it in the movies, we're having it in the TV shows.
I would say that's a better way to do it. And it really does feel like it will conclude. There will be... this is just a moment in Star Wars time that we're just having fun, mixing all the pot together. We're doing this big old jambalaya or something that we're just throwing everything into this pot, but it will come to an end with the movie.
Yeah, I feel like they're really playing around with, like you said, they're playing around with all these different bits and pieces throughout the galaxy, and we're really seeing that come into more of a focus. Dave Filoni, Jon Favreau, they both have an idea of where they want to go, and Dave Filoni knows that the movie that he's going to be working on is the ultimate mix of all of these efforts. And they say this in this interview. This comes from Star Wars Newsnet, which they kind of did a summary of it from the Entertainment Weekly interview and really brought some of the big highlights up into it. Talking with Entertainment Weekly, Filoni revealed that he and Favreau are still in the process of figuring out how their library of characters are going to intersect, though they've had plans for a big event like this for some time. Quote, "We're in the right area code. We are definitely in the right space. I think it's going to be a clamoring of characters saying, how do I get in this picture? And that's what John and I have been figuring out."
Interesting. I would have thought that they had this more planned out. But you know what? Seeing the last season of Mandalorian so far, that checks out.
Yeah, and I think that's where Star Wars and Marvel really differ. In Marvel, they know exactly where they're heading and what needs to happen on the way to that.
Right.
And that is definitely a way to write things. But I feel like that's also some of the holdbacks when it comes to Marvel stuff. They do really limit themselves in terms of how far they can go in one direction or the other. It's very much, we need to do this because we need to have this character, and this character needs to go here, and this character needs to go here, and these things need to happen, so these characters need to go here. That's kind of how they do it with Marvel. But in Star Wars, it's always been like this. Well, George Lucas had somewhat of a plan of where he wanted to go. He didn't know that Luke Skywalker and Leia were going to be that big of siblings or that big of a focus in the story. At least that's how we see from what he wrote. But obviously in interviews, he's fleshed it out kind of I think I knew where I was going. But I was watching an interview with George Lucas recently, and he was talking about how when he was writing the original trilogy, obviously he had inklings of the story from the prequels in his brain, but he was I didn't know those characters or where they went. I knew some of the steps that they took to get them to where they were in the original trilogy, but obviously until I sat down and started writing it, that's where it really came to flesh out.
Yeah, we're pretty much seeing the same history of Star Wars all over again. It's great.
I think that's what makes Star Wars so unique. They get to play around with a lot of different takes, and you get this canvas. Someone over here has already built a Victorian village or whatever.
Right.
And this person over here has built if you look at Andor, they've built this earthy war zone. And then you look at Rogue One, which is in that same space as well. Solo is getting a little bit away, but still has that earthy, gritty take. And you look at something like Mandalorian, where it's okay, let's make a big collaborative piece over here, where we have many different styles in this own little art piece. It's all part of the same canvas, but it's very much each person has a take on what Star Wars is to them.
Mm-hmm. Getting back to the Mandoverse, it's kind of like this. I mean, going off of your analogy that you're going with, it's almost like this sci-fi western that we've got here, but it is that collaboration of like a whole bunch of different takes and people and all of that.
Someone's going to lean more into the samurai aspect, or someone's going to lean more into the sci-fi aspect, and someone's going to really lean more into the western aspect. Like all these different bits and pieces are going to have different flavors.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting to see how they bring that all together, because I see more of like that samurai aspect in like Ahsoka, because we got that a lot more in the Ahsoka stuff that we did or get to see, and then you get more of like, I would say even more western-y in Book of Boba Fett, and so there was like a lot of that like desert woo sort of thing going on with
how many
Vanth
they have the freaking shootout at the end of the season.
And then we got Mando, which is something more, he's become a bit more sci-fi, I would say. Like he's a lot more of the like, I don't know, I mean he's the dude on the run sort of, but like
it started off super western,
but now it's
and then
kind
season
of
2 went
out.
More samurai, and then season 3 is way more sci-fi.
So I think we're just gonna get all these different things meshed together in the coming shows, so it's gonna be really interesting.
And on that note, they also go on to say, growing up with the original films, Return of the Jedi was the end, but then you're always like, but what happens next? And then with episode 7 was set many years later. When I was a kid, I would have thought it would have been that much later, but it made sense. It created an opening where you go, wow, so a lot of things that we knew before are probably in there. How do we excavate that? I think that's a really good piece in terms of like what they're really looking at. I mean, if you look at the extended universe, you have the heir to the Empire, and that's basically like the sequel trilogy original. Like it picks up directly maybe a couple years after Return of the Jedi, but that's where it like really picks off. It's playing with Han, Luke, Leia. It's playing with these key people as they rebuild this new republic. Jon Favreau also says this: as we are getting deeper and deeper into this, you start to have to really map things out and figure out what that story is, and then have those characters fulfill what their growth cycle is and what their mythic hero's journey is. That's always been George Lucas's base. He's a student of Joseph Campbell. How does it fit into the narrative that has this hero's journey? And so as we have more and more characters line up, you have to figure out how these characters are arcing and if it feels ultimately like a Star Wars story.
I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that they're going into the character arcs that was really so important to...
In that interview with George Lucas I was watching, like it's basically like a love fest on Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, because that like when you look at it, like there's a quote from George Lucas that says, "I'm telling a very old story in a new way," and that's the idea of like how legends get built. So you have this core message that you retell in different ways throughout the years.
I think we're at a really interesting time, at least with Mandalorian especially. I feel like they're definitely planning bigger things down the line.
Oh yeah,
but they didn't have either the time that they needed with Pedro Pascal, and just they didn't quite have it where they could make it about him again and make it about this journey and this just they couldn't make it the hero's journey.
They couldn't make it the thing that they needed to make, and that's for multiple reasons. I've heard that Jon Favreau and Kathleen Kennedy had some creative differences in terms of where they wanted the character to go. So I assume some of that in terms of the direction that Mandalorian season 3 went is ultimately like the friction and the struggles with Pedro Pascal's filming schedule and all of that stuff coming to real fruition. It's amazing that it got put out, but I feel like they're like, we need another season. And that's why Book of Boba Fett had Mando in it. It's like they couldn't get Pedro Pascal in until Mandalorian season 3 was able to like really go into production. So they're like, well, we need to have moments. We have a little bit of time with Pedro Pascal, so let's get him in here and let's build this out in this show so we can have more of that story told, because it's going to be a while until we tell his story again.
I guess looking at things from that perspective, like from taking a step back, it makes sense, the decisions they make. Back to the whole like hero's journey thing, I almost wish, I mean, maybe this is kind of off topic, but you redirect me if I'm getting off topic, but in Mandalorian season 3, I really kind of feel like they should have put that hero's journey effort into the Mandalorians themselves and this creating of a new Mandalore. You know, like I really kind of wish that could have been the main character.
Yeah.
That it seemed they were trying to do.
Yeah. There was just so much going on in that season that it was like, well, we have like, it's basically like they poured out their entire toy box and we're like, there are a lot of Mandalorians here.
Yeah. It's like
but also Jack Black's over there.
Right.
And we really want to have him in here too. Like all of the, but like Mandalorian isn't there. Like we have the Mandalorian figure that's him with the mask on and not him without the mask. It's like, okay. Like that's how, like they've always used the analogy of like the Mandalorians, them playing with toys, but making it a Star Wars show.
Yeah.
That's always been the roots of what that is. And then like bringing it back to the Mando movie, like we're going to see all of these bits and pieces, all the Ahsoka, Skeleton Crew, like they're really mentioning how all of these things are going to come together and how we're going to see bits and pieces from Skeleton Crew come into Ahsoka and then Ahsoka come into Mandalorian and the Mandalorian come into all of the other shows as well.
Right.
We're going to see more of that come together as we get closer to what this movie is going to be.
It makes me a little nervous that there is such a weight on this movie already.
Oh, yeah.
When
but it's a Star Wars movie. Of course there's going to be weight on it.
We don't even know like what these other 3 shows that are coming out. I mean, we have Ahsoka, we have Skeleton Crew.
And we got Mando Season 4.
And we got Mando Season 4. Do you think, I guess Acolyte's not going to be a part of that.
No, Acolyte's its own thing.
So we've got these 3 seasons of shows.
Yeah.
This is a lot.
It is.
And like we don't know the characters. I hope they know what the characters are like. So that hopefully they can get ahead of things. But man, like that, there's still so much in the air that we don't know.
There's a lot. And I think that's what makes it so exciting is because they have all these different bits and pieces. And I think Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni has said, I think it was Jon Favreau because he said he's already written this 4th season of Mandalorian. And I think he said that there's going to be bits and pieces from Skeleton Crew and Ahsoka and Book of Boba Fett, that all of these pieces are coming in together as we get. I feel like Mando is the foundation of all these shows.
Yeah.
They're going to set things up. They set up Ahsoka, and Ahsoka's getting her own TV show. They set up Book of Boba Fett, and he got Book of Boba Fett. And now we're going to see kind of like that web come back. And then I assume in season 4, we're going to see more of those bits and pieces come together.
Right.
And then lead it on to whatever happens in the movie. But I assume there's still going to be maybe another season of Ahsoka or maybe another season of Mandalorian to really get us even closer to that movie. Because that movie is like the end cap of what they've all set up.
And knowing Dave Filoni, he's not going to want to just finish. You know, like he's going to stretch that out. He's going to want to play with his Ahsoka toy for a while.
Oh, yeah. He's going to be like, how can we put Ahsoka into the origins of the new Jedi Order? I think she's there. Speaking of like all of these different bits and pieces and what the characters are doing, we mentioned Ahsoka, we mentioned all these different characters. We have Rebels, which is the foundation of what Ahsoka comes to. Obviously, Mando really Mando introduced her as a character in live action. But where she really got fleshed out, other than Clone Wars, where we get to see a very young, like really learning who she is, Ahsoka, we see her become that person, who she is, and what actions she's going to take in Rebels.
So we see Ahsoka as this much more mature leader. We first see her as kind of the code name Fulcrum. We all gasped when we found out, oh my gosh, it's Ahsoka helping.
Yeah, even on the rewatch, that whole moment is so satisfying.
Good. So good. Yeah, but we see that she's heavily involved in the Rebels and
more so than you'd probably think.
I get the feeling, just kind of revisiting Rebels and things, I don't feel like we see a whole lot of what she does. But
at least in the early seasons, for sure.
But you do get the sense that, like, oh no, she's like heavily involved in the.
Yeah. What is it? Is it season 3 or season 4 that she really like gets into the whole like world between worlds, and we really see more of the bits and pieces of what ultimately we're going to be seeing in this new era when it comes to the Mandoverse.
Just with the mention of World Between Worlds, I kind of think they're gonna play more with that in
Oh,
Ahsoka.
oh my
Because I'm pretty
gosh.
sure we saw something of it.
Yeah, so the Sith dude, or the guy with the reddish, orangish lightsaber that Ahsoka faces, that is in the World Between Worlds.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Like, that is the visual that we see, is her approaching him in the World Between Worlds. And we see it just like right off the bat of the Ahsoka trailer. We see her like do the super freaking cool like lightsaber twisty thing, falls through the ground. Like, I'm pretty sure that's where she really goes back to find more of the roots and more of like the history around the Jedi and the World Between Worlds and the Force and how that all moves together. We're 100% going to see more of that.
Yeah, goodness. We also get in Rebels her facing off with Vader and just kind of coming to terms with what her old master has become.
Yes. And I think it's interesting rewatching that, like the first time they have this like Force connection, Darth Vader knows her, but she doesn't recognize the Force that is in him, just that it's familiar.
Yeah, very fascinating. It's
fun.
so good. It's so good.
It is. And then in terms of what Ahsoka's going to be doing, Dave Filoni, they've been doing some really good interviews recently, but Dave Filoni had some really fun stuff about like what's going to be brought into and what episodes or seasons to watch from Rebels when it comes to what you should know. Quote, I would start probably with the episode Jedi Knight, where the sad things happen to Kanan. Even if you didn't understand what that was, it would propel you forward. If you just watched season 4, you'd be set. You can start with that, and you can get that these rebels are fighting this tyrannical empire, and that would get you everything and everybody you need. You don't need to do the entire gamut of Rebels, but you should. Once you watch that, you'll be like, well, I'm going to watch it all. Yeah, I've been very aware when writing these things that you don't need to have seen any of it. Not that if you don't want to, but I want you to, but you don't have to. Yeah.
Funny. So, yeah, definitely things come into play at the end of Rebels. That's season 4.
And there's always been rumors and rumblings on like what if they continued it, what would happen. And I think there was always that effort of like, maybe we should get a season 5. But we never got a season 5. We did get the season 4, and there was a lot that happened there. And I think it's so fascinating to see all of the different connecting pieces that come from Rebels season 4. Because you have Thrawn and his big efforts. You have Ahsoka and what she's doing with World Between Worlds and her absence as she goes forward in time to try to save Ezra. Now we're going to see that come into play in the Ahsoka show. We're also going to see Ezra and Thrawn come into play as they go into the outer worlds, or outer wilds, and the lost or the wildlands of the galaxy. We're going to see their efforts. We're going to see Sabine really take into consideration her history with the Mandalorians, her history as like a bounty hunter. What does she do, and could she be seen in future instances of the Mandalorian?
Right.
I'm surprised we haven't seen her already in the Mandalorian.
It's true.
But I think we're going to see, like we mentioned last episode, Zeb in the New Republic. We're going to see more of these characters take a bigger role in this budding Republic.
Yeah, honestly, you mentioning Sabine, it's like, that's true. Why haven't we seen her yet?
I forgot
What
she was a
the
Mandalorian
crap?
until this rewatch. I was like, oh my gosh, why haven't we seen her already?
And she's not like, yeah, I was. No.
No,
she is a Mandalorian, and she frequently brings it up. So, yeah, why haven't we seen her? Especially in this last episode, like this last season of Mando.
Yeah,
when
you kind of think that like when they're getting all the people together to fight for Mandalore, that she would have been there. But I think that's due to it just being like hey, we've got all these Mandalorians together. Let's go meet up and take back Mandalore.
Right.
Instead of like, let's find all the Mandalorians, Book of Boba Fett, all that stuff. They didn't go in that direction.
It was just, wow, our planet is
we could probably take it
habitable?
back, right, guys?
Yeah, we can do this.
Let's do it.
You're a clan, we're a clan. Let's join up and do it. Yeehaw.
Yeah. He also mentions like some of the process in writing this Ahsoka season, because he's written all the episodes and will, I assume, direct most of them. In addition to writing, he also confirmed to Collider that he will be directing more than one episode of the season. While he wouldn't provide the total number of episodes in the season, Ray Stevenson did in a separate interview that there will be 8 of them. This could hint at Filoni directing 3 episodes, as the list revealed at Star Wars Celebration included 6 names: Filoni, Steph Green, Rick Famuyiwa, Peter Ramsey, Jennifer Getzinger, and Geeta Patel. When asked by Collider about the runtime, though, Filoni did say while they do like to have tight runtimes to keep the momentum going, the current cuts of the episodes could be, on average, slightly longer than The Mandalorian's. Quote, "That's an interesting question. I would say it's pretty relative when you do this kind of work. One thing John and I are very adamant about is we try to cut it down and strip it down to keep it moving. It's definitely a faster and more intense rule than George has. My episodes have actually started pretty long, because I wrote them all, so they are a little different. Probably relative to the other stuff that I've written and done, like the episode The Jedi. If it's going to be tight and fast because I need the action to work, it's going to be shorter. But I would say they are in the same range as the Mandalorian episodes. Maybe on average a little longer. But I honestly don't know where they are right now. In the most recent cuts I've done, but I would say it's in the same range."
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think we all kind of want at this point, now that they've really cemented themselves in the TV show storytelling, I think we all want them to be longer.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think if the individual episodes of Mandalorian Season 3 were longer in general, they would have been better.
We would have gotten more of the story and more. We just would have got more.
Yeah. So I feel like that, especially in the last 2 episodes, like you have the one episode where like, oh my gosh, they took Din Djarin, and then Grogu shows up like immediately in the next episode. I feel that was a limitation on how short the episodes were in general.
It's interesting that he specifically said that if he was doing like action, it makes it shorter.
Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah, you feel that. You do.
Yeah.
It's almost like action throws off the pacing.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And I think that's very indicative when we look at stuff like Mandalorian Season 3, where they just put in action like, oh my gosh, a big alligator comes over and they have to attack it. Oh my gosh, a big pterodactyl comes over and they have to go chase it. Oh my gosh, a big monster came out of the ground and like now we have to go underground. Like,
yeah.
They use action to progress the story quicker rather than saying, okay, we're going to take our time and let's work through this.
Yeah. So very interesting. Hopefully that doesn't mean that they are going to cut down what he has written by putting action in there.
Oh my gosh,
like
there's a dinosaur.
Yeah. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if that's more of like a Disney making them be like, no, it has to be this long.
Probably. But yeah, I think it's exciting to see what Ahsoka's going to bring when it comes to Rebels and what that's going to be like. And I'm really excited and I'm really happy through my rewatch. And I would just want to say this as someone who dropped out of Rebels originally. I know. Shame me.
And you missed out on the best season.
I missed out on the best season. But as someone who dropped out originally, coming back to it now, out of the headspace of, I was going from like, I watched all of Clone Wars and I immediately went to Rebels and I was like, okay, this is different. And I wasn't really mature enough at the time to like really appreciate the level of storytelling that they have in Rebels, because they do stuff so well. And even the filler episodes that I thought were filler when I originally watched it, I'm like, man, that's interesting to see the different connections between Kanan and Ezra and like all the different interpersonal stuff that they do. It's worth it. Go back and watch Rebels now because it is so good. And it's a good like just put on while you're washing dishes or whatever kind of show.
Yeah, it really doesn't demand too much of your attention, but it still is.
But it rewards you for it.
Yeah, it still is really, really good.
But with that, thank you all so much for watching and listening to this episode of Star Wars Uplink. We greatly appreciate all your support. You can listen to us wherever you find podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, you name it, you can find us on it, as well as watch all of our videos and the video version of the podcast on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@StarWarsUplink. And you can find us on social media as well at Star Wars Uplink. As always, hey, thanks for listening. And may the Force be with you.